rescue at Dunkirk was one of the many daring military operations during the Second World War. In April 1942, a group of B-25 bombers led by Jimmy Doolittle took off from the carrier Hornet far out in the Pacific. The Royal Air Force's Mosquito fighter bombers conducted many daring low-flying raids on pinpoint targets. This attack on Gestapo headquarters in Denmark was one of them. British and Italian commandos stunned the world, conducting daredevil operations in human torpedoes. They sank a number of ships in enemy ports. But in September 1943, the rescue of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini from a secluded mountain prison may have been the most dramatic. Mussolini brought Italy into the war in June 1940. Until then, Italy had not been ready to join Germany. By then, France was barely able to hold on against the attacking German forces. Just before the armistice was signed, Italian troops invaded the south of France. Now Mussolini could have a seat at the victor's table. He turned south. First, he wanted to take control of the Mediterranean from the Royal Navy. He also wanted to expand Italy's control of North Africa by seizing Egypt and Sudan from Britain. The Royal Navy, though, stopped the Italian fleet in several engagements on the Mediterranean. Italian forces were repelled in Egypt and lost the eastern Libyan province of Cyrenaica. By the summer of 1941, Italy had been all but driven out of her East African possessions. German forces were sent in to help the Italians. For the next 2 years, the fighting swept back and forth across the deserts of Cyrenaica and western Egypt. By the end of 1940, Mussolini had become frustrated with his own losses and Hitler's victories. He invaded Greece from Albania, which Italy occupied before the war. It was disastrous for Mussolini. Mussolini was only saved by the German invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece in April 1941. By midsummer, it was clear that Italy was very much the junior partner in the Axis coalition. The Mediterranean was now controlled by the German commander-in-chief south, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. This was evident in 1942, when Mussolini, like the other minor allies, sent an entire army to the Eastern Front to fight under the German command. By the end of the year, Italy's situation was grim. The forces in Russia suffered many casualties in Stalingrad. In North Africa, the Italian and German forces were being driven farther west along the coast. The Allies were also establishing positions along the northwest African coast. Then, in May 1943, Italy's empire in Africa came crashing down when nearly 250,000 Italian and German troops surrendered in Tunisia. It was the beginning of the end for Il Duce and his dictatorship. On July 10, 1943, Allied forces stormed the beaches of southern Sicily. By now, it was clear that even with the help of German troops, the Italian forces would not be able to drive back the Allies. Sicily would be lost. Surrender seemed to be the only way out, but it was highly unlikely that the Allies would accept it if Mussolini was still in charge. On the evening of July 24th, the fascist Grand Council, through which Mussolini had ruled Italy, voted to return King Victor Emmanuel to power. The next day, Mussolini resigned and was arrested. King Victor Emmanuel appointed Marshal Pietro Badoglio head of the new government. Rome took to the streets to celebrate the end of fascism. But Badoglio announced that Italy would not abandon her allies. For Italy, the war would continue. Badoglio really had no choice. There were still German troops in Rome, and more were being sent through the Alps in anticipation of an Allied invasion. Mussolini's whereabouts had to be kept secret. It was possible that the remaining fascists and Germans might organize a counter-coup and restore him to power. Mussolini was first taken to the island of Ponza, then to Maddalena. King Victor Emmanuel's hopes that Badoglio would negotiate with the Allies were fruitless. But on August 3rd, the cabinet sent delegates to Tangiers to meet with the Allies. Ten days later, General Giuseppe Castellano secretly flew to Lisbon. He informed the British ambassador that Italy's surrender was imminent. But Hitler was determined to free Mussolini. The Germans devised an operation codenamed Oak. No sooner had the plan been devised than Mussolini was moved to a ski resort at Gran Sasso, high in the Abruzzi Mountains. On August 27, 1943, Mussolini was placed in a hotel there called the Albergo Refugio. It could only be reached by cable car. Negotiations with General Castellano continued in Lisbon. He flew back to Italy, then to Cassibile, where he secretly signed a document of surrender on behalf of his government. That same day, September 3rd, the British 8th Army crossed the Straits of Messina, landing in Italy. It was agreed that the surrender remained secret until the main Allied landings at Salerno, south of Naples, on September 9th. But Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower announced it on September 8th.
The Italian government has surrendered its armed forces unconditionally. As Allied Commander-in-Chief, I have granted a military armistice, the terms of which have been approved by the government of the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
The main Allied invasion force was still at sea. The Germans moved additional forces into Rome. King Victor Emmanuel and his government fled to the south of Italy. One of the terms of surrender was that Mussolini be handed over to the Allies. Now Hitler was more determined than ever to rescue Il Duce. Waffen-SS Captain Otto Skorzeny was given the assignment. He had formed the Friedenthal hunting groups, Germany's answer to the British commandos, and was also a veteran of the French Balkan and Eastern Front campaigns. He received scars in a duel when he was a student in his native Vienna. Meanwhile, the landings at Salerno took place, and the Germans fought fiercely. An intercepted Italian radio message identified the location of Mussolini, but how would they rescue him? An air operation was the most likely way. November 10th, General Karl Student, commanding the 11th Flieger Corps, was informed about the secret. He had masterminded the airborne invasion of Crete in 1949. Now he had to plan Mussolini's rescue, with Skorzeny responsible for bringing him to safety. A parachute operation would be too risky because of the unpredictable winds around the Gran Sasso. But a glider landing might work. Student alerted his elite parachute demonstration battalion. Skorzeny sketched the final plan. The key objectives were the hotel and upper cable car station and the lower cable car station. The majority of the parachute battalion would travel by road and secure the lower station. They would also prevent any interference from the Carabinieri. One company, together with Skorzeny and his men, would fly in by glider, land at the upper station, and carry out the rescue. Two Fieseler light aircraft, one flown by Student's personal pilot and escorted by Skorzeny, would fly Mussolini to safety. The base was an airfield outside Rome. Student arrived on the morning of September 12th and briefed the members of the glider operation. The parachute demonstration battalion left the airfield by truck at dawn. At 1 p.m., towed by a Henschel HE-126 airplane, the gliders took off. H hour was precisely 1 hour later. As they flew, the ground force arrived in the valley below the Gran Sasso. The paratroops took the Italian Carabinieri by surprise and quickly secured the ground station. The gliders flew in 3 groups, Skorzeny and his men in the second. The group leaders circled to gain altitude as the others flew straight toward their objective. Skorzeny landed first, then the others. The paratroops set up defensive positions while a carabinieri general whom they had brought with them ordered the Italian guards to stand down. Skorzeny raced to the hotel. The paratroops established communication with their comrades in the valley. Skorzeny found Mussolini and informed them that he had been sent by Hitler to rescue him. Unfortunately, one of the two light aircraft was damaged in the landing. Mussolini and Skorzeny squeezed into the other one, flown by Student's personal pilot, Captain Gerlach. They could only get airborne by taking off downhill and into the wind. After a big drop, they managed to take off. Hitler was thrilled with the rescue and waited to congratulate Mussolini. He also told him that he was to set up a new republic in northern Italy. Mussolini's son-in-law was also there to greet him. Skorzeny, not Student and his paratroops, was made the hero. The man whom Skorzeny rescued had lost almost all power. The new republic in northern Italy was merely a puppet government and was watched closely by the Germans. Duce could only watch helplessly as the Allies moved north. In June 1944, they entered Rome, where he had basked in so many pre-war triumphs, warmly welcomed by the people. On June 20th, 1944, a bomb exploded at the Führer's headquarters in East Prussia, but Hitler survived. Mussolini was one of the first to show his support. In April 1945, the Allies quickly crushed the German forces in northern Italy. Mussolini's dreams of power were now turning to dust. He tried to flee to Switzerland, but was caught by Italian partisans. They shot him and his mistress, Clara Petacci. Their bodies were hung in one of Milan's squares and mocked by the crowds. Mussolini's fate should not detract from the achievement of the men who rescued him 18 months earlier. The real heroes in the operation were the mastermind, Karl Student, his paratroops, and his pilots. That they did not receive the acclaim such an operation deserved must rank as one of the many injustices that characterized the Nazi regime. The paratroops planned and executed Operation Oak. And they ensured that the rescue of Mussolini from the Gran Sasso would be one of the most spectacular operations of World War II.
Kansas City, July 17, 1981. Close to 1,500 people gathered at the newly built Hyatt Hotel for a dance competition. The hotel was less than a year old and featured innovative architectural designs. At 7:45 p.m., as some danced and others looked down on the festive atmosphere from skywalks, the fourth floor, 60-ton walkway gave way. It landed on the second floor skywalk below, and both walkways fell to the lobby floor. 114 people were killed. This was the single largest structural disaster in terms of loss of life in U.S. history. The investigation following the disaster would reveal an accumulation of project management errors, which ultimately allowed for a simple yet deadly flaw to be installed in the support system of the overhead walkways. The Kansas City Hyatt was a stunning example of current architectural innovation when it first opened its doors in July of 1980.
Well, the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Kansas City was commissioned to be an architecturally interesting and imposing structure. The lobby, when you walked in, was 4 stories high.
One of the signature features about the Hyatt Hotel in Kansas City was the fact that they had a set of suspended walkways. They were there to capture the attention of visitors that walked in because they looked like they were virtually suspended in air.
But few realized that the hotel had a problematic history.
This hotel was envisioned as a large part of the downtown redevelopment and was commissioned on a fast track. Get it up.
The hotel then went through a fast track in which we built this whole hotel between 1978 and 1980. We built a huge hotel which consists of an underground parking garage and including the tower in a period of 2.5 to 2 3/4 years.
The fast track method, which is still used today, entails continuing to design components of a structure as others are already being built. The expedited construction of the Hyatt was further complicated by staffing problems.
In 1979, construction of the hotel is going apace, but certain management and personnel problems show up.
Somehow, because of the problems of fast track, because of the changes on the design team, the designer, the design engineer, the engineer of record, and the chief detailer resigned somewhere in the middle of the project. This project was transferred to somebody else.
During these personnel shifts, a minor design change in the connections supporting the atrium walkways was overlooked. In the original blueprints, a single metal rod ran through a hollow steel beam called a box beam. The rod carried the weight of each walkway to a roof truss.
The original box beam construction was supposed to be a continuous rod. It was supposed to be one rod that went through the 4th floor and picked up the 2nd floor independently.
The design was difficult to build, so the steel fabricator made a request to replace the single rod with 2 separate rods, thereby creating new connection points in the 4th floor beams. This modification left the 2nd floor walkway hanging from the 4th floor instead of the ceiling, doubling the load on the 4th floor box beam connections. The new walkway design needed to be drawn in detail, and new weight calculations needed to be included. Several levels of project managers approved the new bridge design, with the simple yet crucial load calculations missing.
It wasn't that this connection was misdesigned. This connection was never designed. That was the problem. It was detailed, but in changes and movements of the detail between the different parties, it never got engineered. And as it became part of various detailed plans, people kept assuming that the design had been checked at some point in the process.
Hyatt engineer Jack Gillum gave the undesigned connections the final seal of approval, and they were installed. There was an opportunity to catch the flawed design in October of 1979, when during construction, a section of the atrium roof collapsed. Construction was halted, and the building was inspected.
We checked all the connections to the roof, and but we did not check anything any further at that time. We did not look at the bridges whatsoever.
So literally, the whole lobby, all of the design details were checked. Even the rods suspending the walkways were looked at. And no one thought to go to where the walkways connected together and down to each other and say, what's that connection and how is it designed? But unfortunately and literally, the check stopped one connection too short.
In November, construction began again, and the hotel opened the following summer. Over the next year, the steel box beam connections slowly deformed. On the evening of July 17th, a weekly dance competition was being covered by local news crews. Reporter Michael Mahoney was reaching for a videotape when disaster struck.
I was reaching down, sort of looking at the floor, and heard these really sharp metallic pop, pop, like that. The walkway on the second floor began to sag and then finally broke apart. There were people trapped underneath these huge blocks of concrete. There were people that had been speared by the broken glass from the side rails of the walkways.
Investigators who were on the scene within hours after the collapse discovered glaring clues as to what had happened.
When I get there, there's just 6 rods hanging silently from the ceiling where the walkways have pulled off and collapsed. By the first morning, we all knew what had happened. There was no question. And there are some classic photographs that we and others have taken of the joint where the 2 lips are bent through and they're perfectly straight.
Analysis of the debris enabled forensic engineers to reenact the chain of events, giving them a clear picture of how the overstressed box beam connections failed.
Literally, you had a situation where the rod was pulling up at the bottom of the C, and this bottom set of thumbs was the whole load-bearing structure for the 2 sections. Well, of course, what happened in the disaster is the rod pulls right through.
The National Bureau of Standards report indicated that the box beam connection failure was inevitable.
The design should have considered larger nut, or even better and simpler, consider a plate with a hole. That would be like a distribution plate or spacer that would be put there. That plate probably would cost something outrageous like 40 cents, maybe $1 with the hole. That what would have prevented this failure.
The Hyatt tragedy was as much about process as it was physics.
Most importantly, what the investigation revealed, that the process by which we design and build structure needs to be more rigorous and higher level of quality control.
The engineers who affixed their approval seals to the incomplete shop drawings lost their licenses.
Where does the buck stop on this thing? Well, it stops, I mean, who are the responsible people? I mean, everybody should be responsible for their own work. Okay, so does it stop with the owner? Was the owner responsible for certain things? Probably, yes. The contractor, yes. The fabricator, yes. But it really stops in only one place. It stops with the structural engineer who put his seal on the drawings, and that was me.
The Kansas City Hyatt was a much-changed building when it reopened its doors 11 weeks after the disaster.
The walkways are back, but all of the elegance of the original design, the etherealness, the thinness of support, that is gone. It has been replaced with a gigantic pillar system that has to be over-designed by a factor of 20. I think in part to ensure that there's confidence that those walkways will never come down again.
The collapse was a wake-up call to engineers.
As a result of this disaster, the codes that govern the structural design of buildings of this type were actually changed. There was a very explicit articulation in the subsequent revision of the codes of where the responsibility for this engineering analysis lies, thereby hopefully ensuring that you'll never have a situation again where someone assumes someone else is doing it because it's not clear in their minds just who's really got the responsibility to do it.
The 114 lives lost in the Hyatt Skywalk collapse serve as a lasting reminder to engineers that the smallest of errors can lead to the largest of tragedies. City building inspectors averaged just 8 minutes a week inspecting the 40-story Hyatt Hotel during its 28-month-long construction.